I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com.
Scary headlines offer plenty of reasons to be anxious or depressed, but that's not a healthy way to function. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Dr. Drew Ramsey offers us several basic principles for reclaiming our mental fitness. One is staying connected with friends.
When we look at what happens, especially as people age, having connections and these types of connections, a variety of connections, is incredibly protective for your mental health.
How do you maintain connections to those you care about? What else do you need to know about building mental fitness?
Why modern life breaks our brains, and what we can do about it.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced on July 7th that bird flu is no longer a public health emergency. H5N1 avian influenza is widespread in birds and other wildlife around the world. It caused multiple outbreaks in dairy cattle and chickens over the past year, and some agricultural workers became ill. According to the CDC, 70 human cases resulted in one death over the past year, and the current public health risk is low. Bird flu will be tracked along with ordinary seasonal influenza. A different agency, the USDA, will continue to follow infections in dairy herds and poultry flocks.
Public health authorities report that the number of measles cases in the U.S. this year is higher than it's been in more than 30 years. Back in 2000, the U.S. had eliminated measles so that it no longer spread spontaneously in this country. But since then, vaccination rates have dropped significantly, leaving many people susceptible to this highly contagious disease. As a result, more than 1,300 cases have been confirmed in 38 states and the District of Columbia. 3 people have died as a consequence of the infection. Texas is where this year's outbreak got started, and it has been hardest hit. Other countries are also struggling against measles, with more than 3,000 cases reported this year in Canada. Mexico is also experiencing a large outbreak that started with a child who caught the disease while visiting Texas. 2 doses of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, or MMR, protects both children and adults from the infection at about 97% effectiveness.
For decades, hormone replacement therapy was considered standard of care for menopausal women. It eased hot flashes and was promoted to reduce the risk of heart disease and brittle bones. Then along came the Women's Health Initiative, a large long-term clinical trial of estrogen and progestin therapy. It reported an association between hormone therapy and an increased risk for breast cancer, blood clots, and heart attacks. In subsequent years, some scientists have criticized the methodology and conclusions of the WHI. A new study of menopausal hormone therapy published in JAMA Network Open examined the risk of estrogen and progestin in the later development of breast cancer. The authors reviewed data from 31 studies involving over 42,000 women with breast cancer and more than 71,000 control participants. Healthy weight women taking this kind of hormone therapy were more likely to be diagnosed with specific breast cancer subtypes known as luminal A and luminal B. The association of menopausal hormone therapy and these specific types of tumor was less marked in heavier women.
A different study, a meta-analysis published in Lancet Oncology, analyzed data from more than 450,000 women under 55. These women were taking hormones, either estrogen alone or estrogen plus progestin, to help with perimenopause or following a hysterectomy. Nearly 8,500 of these women developed breast cancer before they turned 55. According to the analysis, use of estrogen alone by women following hysterectomy decreased the risk of young-onset breast cancer. Use of estrogen plus progestin increased the likelihood by 10%.
Americans have long been warned not to eat too many eggs. Although they supply the important nutrient choline, eggs also contain high levels of cholesterol. Nutrition scientists worried that people eating eggs would raise their levels of blood cholesterol and develop arterial plaque and cardiovascular disease as a result. A randomized controlled trial including more than 50 volunteers tested 3 different diets to see how much dietary cholesterol boosts serum cholesterol. They followed the diets for 5 weeks each. The investigators concluded saturated fat, not dietary cholesterol, elevates LDL cholesterol. Consuming 2 eggs a day as part of a low-fat diet actually lowers LDL concentrations and thus might reduce the risk of heart disease. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Are you feeling anxious or overwhelmed these days? Lots of people are. Whether it's floods, fires, famine, or war, the headlines can be upsetting.
Today we'll be learning how to build mental fitness even when circumstances become stressful.
We're talking with Dr. Drew Ramsey. He's an integrative psychiatrist and proponent of nutritional psychiatry and mental fitness. Dr. Ramsey's latest book is Healing the Modern Brain: 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Drew Ramsey.
It is so great to be back with you, Joe and Terry. Hey, everybody.
Well, we are delighted to have you back, and we are so excited to talk about your new book. And I guess my first question has to do with the fact that humans have faced enormous uncertainty and a certain amount of chaos throughout our evolution. But these days, it seems to be that we're coping less well than ever. According to our calculations, there are over 40 million Americans who are currently taking antidepressant drugs. And that doesn't take into account the millions more who depend on anti-anxiety medications such as Valium, diazepam, Klonopin, clonazepam, and Xanax that have become household words. So why are pharmaceutical solutions to mental health problems falling so short?
Well, I'm not sure that they are. It's interesting. I'm a prescriber, and I think a lot of people get great benefits from medications. I think one of the reasons that they're falling short because we have a tremendous burden, and I think a lot of people either don't trust medications or they have some questions or they just have a lot of stigma and bias that they don't want to take them. Whether you take medications or not, the modern world has a new set of stressors. Joe, as you point, we're very resilient species. We've been around for a long time. We've been up against famine and fires and plagues and all kinds of things, and we've survived. Now, today, in about the past, let's say 30 years, really during my career as a psychiatrist, I've been doing this for about 20, 25 years now, we've introduced things like the portable alternative brain, your iPhone or your smartphone. That's given you a lot of power and a lot of distraction. We have changed food significantly. We've done things to our environment like added plastics. Never before has there been a teaspoon of microplastics in pretty much every human brain. That's the consequences and brain consequences of that are not really known. But when I say healing the modern brain, I wanted to be clear about some of the new modern stressors. And the other I talk about are the vices. People focus on pharmaceuticals, but they don't tend to focus on the number one pharmaceuticals that Americans love to take, and that's alcohol. And so, we have a country now that's really kind of saturated in alcohol, saturated in cannabis products. A lot of people, a lot of parents are getting super excited and experimenting with psychedelics. And so again, this is the milieu that our modern brains and our our kids' brains are living in. And I thought it was very important to focus on, yes, a lot of people are struggling with their mental health, but it's 60 million Americans that just have depression and anxiety. And I think people want to do more than just take a medicine, even though the medicines are very helpful for a lot of symptoms. My experiences as a clinician and what these tenets are is we've all got to be doing more to push back against this modern life. For example, one of the tenets is connection. And I think everybody listening, Joe and Terry, I'm sure you kind of also feel if we don't really pay attention and invest in our connections, our friendships, our relationships, our work, the modern world somehow kind of degrades them. We end up texting every now and then, right? We end up a little disengaged at work. So that's really, yes, lots of people are struggling, but I think there's more we need to be doing. And that's what we call mental fitness. This notion that we need to kind of get our mental health in better shape.
Dr. Ramsey, you suggest in Healing the Modern Brain that we can make some inroads against these overwhelming changes that we're exposed to by changing our habits. And can you tell us how that would work?
Yes, and you're exactly right. I'm a huge believer, and I'm a believer not just because I'm a true believer in mental health, but because I'm sitting talking to you in my treatment room on a couch where I just saw a patient, and right after this, I'll see another patient. These tenets come from my clinical work and really from my patients, that over the years, seeing things that all of us agree when we invest more time in really have huge benefits for our mental health. And to pull that together into a cohesive framework, mental fitness is really, it's about some new knowledge. Like a lot of people, when they talk about mental health, they talk about medicines and serotonin. Interesting stuff. But I would say that's kind of like music from the 90s, like classics.
Dr. Ramsey, I want to interrupt you right there because I think a lot of your colleagues have told their patients that they have, for lack of a better term, broken brains. It's just a matter of, faulty neurochemistry. If we just adjust the serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine levels, we can fix you. So how does that compare to changing the habits that are so critical and that you emphasize in your book?
Well, I think that it's a similar idea, and that I also want to adjust your neurochemistry. But I believe serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine are all going to be involved. You may or may not need medications. That's kind of one part of mental fitness. The first tenet is self-awareness. And a lot of people I know, part of their journey in mental health and mental fitness is understanding what medicines or supplements that help, let's say, their mood or anxiety work. But besides that, we've got to invest in some other things. For example, like our sleep hygiene. Right? Everybody's sort of been saying the same thing for years. You need to sleep more, get 8 hours. But there's not a lot of kind of detailed instruction of like, hey, actually, here are the things that you need to do. Let's do an inventory of your bedroom. Right? Let's really pay attention to your bedtime. Let's start tracking your sleep. I've been tracking my sleep for 4 years now. When I tell you that I sleep for 6 hours a night, and I'm in bed for about 7.5, it's backed up with a lot of data. And everybody listening can do that too now. Even with your iPhone, if you haven't ever checked your health records or any smartphone, it has some metrics of how you've been sleeping, some averages. Same thing with your step count. So these are all basic tenets of mental fitness. I think the ones that people recognize, the kind of classics of lifestyle medicine, sleep, nutrition, movement. There are also some new knowledge, as I said, around how your brain works, like around neuroplasticity and inflammation and how that affects how we feel. But as you're talking, about these pieces of mental fitness that are really about new skills and some new habits that I ask people to get into. And I think it's where, yes, I think it's going to alter your neurochemistry. But you're right, Joe. I do want people to hear my approach as being in almost like a different lane than medications and psychotherapy. I want everybody to know that I'm a big believer in both of those. I practice both of those every day. But I see there are other things that I want all my patients doing. And I don't want just my patients doing it. I don't care if you're a patient or not. I don't care whether you have depression or anxiety right now or not. I've seen the numbers. I know what everybody listening is up against. Yes.
Dr. Ramsey, you mentioned a few minutes ago neuroplasticity, and I'm wondering if you would tell us what that is and why it's important.
For sure, Terry. Thanks for asking. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to grow and repair itself. And so neuroplasticity, there's a part of it, neurogenesis, where we actually give birth to new brain cells. And this is what I mean about new knowledge. When I finished medical school at Indiana University Medical School year 2000, we didn't know this. We were actually taught, boy, all the cells in your body reproduce except your brain cells. And then we learned that is wrong. So the idea that by moving my body more, by eating more seafood and leafy greens, by getting just a little more sleep every night, I'm actually increasing the amount of a molecule in my brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a growth factor for your brain. That is very motivating for me. And so neuroplasticity is one of these, I think it's like a holy grail of mental health, that if you're after something that's true in mental health, your neurons, your brain cells, we have 90 billion of them, doing a better job, having kind of more of the environment they need to grow and repair. To me, that's a no-brainer. That's great for our mental health and kind of what I want to be pursuing. It appeals to me much more than, I want to like boost serotonin. It's like, why serotonin? There's like 140 neurotransmitters in the brain, all of which have some influence on mood. Let's really focus on a kind of master switch. These are the three lenses in healing the modern brain. I kind of ask everyone to look at all of these tenets through. One is neuroplasticity. The second is inflammation, that our body's alarm systems are being triggered too much by the modern world. Whether it's your highly processed food or your bad sleep or your social isolation increases inflammatory factors in your blood. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And then the last is the microbiome, understanding that, hey, again, brand new science. Eating more fermented foods changes how your brain functions. Like, wow. Talk about an empowering idea. Eating more plants looks like it protects people from things like depression. Eating more seafood and more nuts. I have this little rhyme from nutrition: seafood, greens, nuts and beans, and a little dark chocolate. Just is kind of where to start. And so neuroplasticity started going on and on, but all of these tenets really are around like, hey, what are the things I could do in my everyday life to get my brain growing and repairing itself better? And that's what I hope to take kind of these observations from my clinical work and my patients of what really seems to help, and marry that with the brand new exciting science we're seeing in mental health and psychiatry.
You're listening to Dr. Drew Ramsey, integrative psychiatrist and author of Healing the Modern Brain, 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
After the break, we'll learn more about the importance of connection.
What can you do to keep your connection strong?
Which matters most, the number or the variety of our human connections?
Inflammation affects the brain. Can we reduce it with diet?
Perhaps we could if we focus on what best fuels the microbiome.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you or someone you love struggles with nasal congestion, whether from allergies, chronic sinus problems, or even pregnancy-induced rhinitis, there's finally a drug-free, FDA-approved solution that actually works.
Sonu, S-O-N-U, is a wearable headband that uses personalized sound-based therapy to open nasal passages and improve airflow in minutes. 15 minutes a day to be precise. This therapy is backed by clinical research and developed by Stanford rhinologists and physicians. It's safe for anyone 12 years old or older to use, and it's gentle.
No steroids, no sprays, just natural, fast relief. Learn more at getsonu.com. That's get, SONU.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-cleared drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, a sound-based alternative to steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
In turbulent times, we all need strategies to maintain our mental health. Changing our habits can be a surprisingly effective strategy for building mental fitness. One crucial thing that our guest recommends is keeping our connections to other people strong.
One problem that can affect how our brains work is inflammation. You may think about this as maybe a splinter in your finger or a rock dropped on your toe. Can there be inflammation in the brain? Could your diet make a difference in your level of brain inflammation? Which foods enhance our microbiome so it can bring the level of inflammation down?
To find out, we're talking with Dr. Drew Ramsey. He is an integrative psychiatrist and proponent of nutritional psychiatry and mental fitness. He served as an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University in the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons for 20 years. Dr. Ramsey is founder of the Brain Food Clinic in New York City and Spruce Mental Health in Jackson, Wyoming. His latest book is Healing the Modern Brain, 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
Dr. Ramsey, I think everyone listening to the People's Pharmacy has heard about the importance of nutrition, has heard about the importance of sleep, knows that physical activity is a critical pillar for good health, but you talk about connection as also one of the main tenets of mental fitness. Tell us more about connection. What are you talking about? Why is it important?
Our connections protect our mental health like nothing else. Our interpersonal relationships, our connections, whether it's with an institution or sports team, they give us a sense of belonging and a fundamental sense of our identity. And it's one of the aspects of modern life that you have to pay attention to. And as I say in the book, we're more connected than ever. I have more friends, followers, people who see kind of some of what I'm up to, whether it's friends and those folks on your Facebook page, or whether it's if you have a small platform, your followers. That's one type of connection. We want to make sure that in our personal connections, we're investing the right type of time, that we're not just having our personal relationships kind of go by the wayside, that as we get busier, right, as White Lotus and our various Netflix series and our scrolling time and doom scrolling time kind of eat and creep into more and more of our life, that there's only so much of that time. And usually one of the things I see degrade, and one of the challenges with depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders is how you really have to work a little harder to keep your connections going. If you're a very socially anxious person, how you keep your human connections strong, has some hurdles that other people don't have. And so working with patients over the years, I've seen people just been blown away by people's resilience and work, because it's work, at really building and strengthening their connections. In Healing the Modern Brain, I ask people there's a little exercise or exercises for all these tenets and little practical tips. And I ask people to make a web of connection and to kind of map it out. This is something I do in my life, where I sometimes feel, boy, there's things are getting a little diffuse, let's say, and I don't feel that there's connectedness I want to. There are a lot of people I've maybe caught up with. And so I find mapping it out. Also, it's not just interpersonal relationships. A lot of times when we talk about connection, we're just talking about like a partner, a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, or we're talking about a best friend. And I think it's important to think also about your connection, for example, to your community. I moved to a new community several years ago. I tell the story in the book. I've done that a couple times, moving from New York to our family farm in rural Indiana, and then a few years later out to Wyoming. And so with those moves, there's such a stark, clear need and challenge to build connections, build community. And that's a different thing than building friendships. It requires a different type of time and investment. When we look at what happens, especially as people age, having connections and these types of connections, a variety of connections, is incredibly protective for your mental health.
Well, Dr. Ramsey, you've mentioned older people indirectly, and I suspect that's especially important, especially when somebody loses a partner. But I also want to talk about teenagers because you write about teenagers and social isolation and how they're vulnerable to depression and anxiety. How can teenagers create the support systems that will be good for their brains?
Well, Joe, in some ways, like they always have, and you're right, I'm focused on old people because we're talking on my 51st birthday, and I'm feeling that wonderful part of aging. I'm feeling a different sense than I ever have. Thank you. It's great to be with you all. What a fun way to celebrate. And also for the first time talking, I have one of these in my house now. I have a teen. And so, for example, the idea, let's get rid of the phones. That sounds so good until you have a teen. And I see that what my teen does on her phone is she reads books and she texts with her friends, this great group of girls that really supports each other and, is doing that thing that teen girls kind of do, working on understanding each other and working together and being annoyed by each other. So I try to really support that as much as I can, talking about the importance of friendships. I think also a big thing for adults right now is modeling this. Are you an adult that is really fighting against this? Or are you an adult and a parent that's telling teens to do something that you don't do yourself? Right? That just does not work. Teens are allergic to hypocrisy. I do think there's great recommendations. Jonathan Haidt at NYU and a number of other people have really sounded the alarm and said, hey, social media in teens and preteens leads to more self-harm, more depression, more anxiety, not by a little bit, by a lot. And look at the data, right? Teenage depression, when I finished residency in 2004, was 8.1% of our teens. That moved up to about 14% in 2000. I think it was 14. And then 2021 on, we have about 20% of our teens have clinical depression. And so a number of things are happening when we see a rise in mental health disorders. One is that we have increased awareness, right? So I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm not sleeping very well. If I'm a teen in America today, there's some messaging, some idea, hey, you might be struggling with depression, you should get some help. And so we see more people, engaging in treatment in a certain way. But in terms of teens and building communities, I think it's very important to get them volunteering. I think it's very important to get them doing something that doesn't involve the phone, something with their hands. I love summer jobs, especially when teens get to feel more of their proficiency and responsibility. It's such a cool time for teens. I love seeing skills being built in teens, things that we haven't really thought before. Like I have a lot of teen and early 20s guys that I treat. And in our text chain, because patients text with me a lot, there are a lot of pictures of the food that they cook. And it's just such a fun kind of element, again, of teen and adolescent health. How can we think about these?
Oh, well, that's cool.
It's super cool. There was actually a huge study about that, Terry. Depressed teen boys in Australia, they're depressed young men, late teens, early 20s. They had 2 dietary counseling sessions teaching them about a Mediterranean diet, but particularly focused on 3 things. The researchers found that 3 things really made a big difference. More legumes, so it's like more hummus, more white beans, more bean burritos, more olive oil, so they like dip bread in olive oil as a snack, and more vegetables that they like. If you don't like broccoli, don't worry about it. Do you like lettuce or do you like carrot? Oh, you like carrots? Eat more carrots. Can you eat a carrot every day? That kind of messaging. 36% of those young men went into full remission from their depression. It's the AMEND trial by Heather Francis, if anybody wants to look it up. It's exciting type of research, again, which is a little counterintuitive. We don't think about young men as a population that's going to like take care of their nutrition. They're just going to like focus, I don't know, on meat and protein and getting swole. But it's not true.
And I think also we don't often enough think of teenagers as people who are really quite capable. When you were talking about summer jobs, I was thinking, yes, teenagers can really do a lot of stuff if they are given the support that they need in order to do all that stuff. And I think it's become less common these days for those opportunities to be available for young people.
I think a lot of people, if you're listening and you live in an environment where there's a seasonal, like we have a huge seasonal tourism here in Jackson, Wyoming, and so there's a lot of opportunity for summer teen jobs. There's kind of a big tradition of that. There's whether you're helping out with river trips or whether you're helping out in one of the hotels, there's just all kinds of things to do. I think that's true in every community in a certain way. And yes, I think teens are incredibly responsible. I think that we all need to wake up. They know how to do more than we do with their phones. And I think it's our job as adults to really model for them a lot of what the non-phone, non-digital based joy is about. If there are things you love that, you're active that are, aren't about your phone. Right now, thinking about, if it's summer months, right? What kind of gardening and kind of planting and enjoyable stuff can you include them in? I'm always a big fan of obviously cooking, and then I just think it's fun to talk about some of these tenets.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Ramsey, you talked about food, and you talked earlier about inflammation and the microbiome. And so I'd like to combine both of those, if you don't mind, because they have such a profound impact on the brain, and get some suggestions, practical suggestions about the kinds of foods that can reduce inflammation and can enhance the microbiome. What do you recommend?
Joe, that's an easy one. I just recommend lentils. It's like, boom. When was the last time you had lentils? And everybody just do this. There's a little inventory. When was the last time you had lentils? If you're like,
we had lentils. We had lentils about 3 or 4 days ago, as a matter of fact.
Okay,
they were delicious.
That shows everybody listening. If Joe and Terry had lentils 3 or 4 days ago, lentils are a great food. Lots of fiber, lots of folate, which is vitamin B9, one of the most important nutrients for our mental health. It's one that actually we test as psychiatrists. We test your B12, your B9, your zinc, your iron. There are a number of vitamins we just know if you don't have enough, you're deficient, you're going to be depressed. So the microbiome and food go together well because our intervention to shift the microbiome should be entirely food-based for most people and most patients. Quickly, why does inflammation relate to the microbiome? And this is wild. I didn't know this coming out of medical school, coming out of residency. But in my work in nutritional psychiatry, I've come to appreciate that our immune system, the largest part of our immune system is our gut. And when you think about the immune system as kind of centralized in the gut, it's very exciting because then there's some ability you have in your food choices, right at the end of your fork. It's lentil soup or it's French fries. Which one? You have the ability to shift the microbiome. And in shifting the microbiome, you have the ability to regulate inflammation. So the promise of this work, or the idea, the hopeful promise, is that in having a more diverse intake of plants, like the number one microbiome expert in the world, most cited, is a man named Tim Spector. And Dr. Tim Spector recommends trying to get 30 different plants a week. Again, when you think about, like, we were talking about teens, right? What's the thing that, like, I wonder if my team says, like, at the end of the week, like, how many plants did you eat this week? And we just like talk about it. Not that I want everyone to be entirely plant-based. It's just 90% of Americans don't eat enough plants, don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. Easy peasy. Like everybody reasonable agrees that those are an important part of your diet you should eat more of. When you eat a more diverse set of fruits and vegetables, like lentils, pears, raspberries, strawberries, microgreens are big in my house right now.
Whoa, what's a microgreen?
Microgreens, everybody, you'll see those. Everybody look in your supermarket today. I'd love to be with you as you go through that first produce section. And so you'll see all your leafy greens, and then usually next to the leafy greens, the kales and the collards and all those, you'll see some packages. Little clamshells packages are usually really thin. And it's a layer of microgreens. Microgreens, they're like the caviar of the vegan world, Joe. Microgreens is you take this seed, an arugula seed, and instead of letting it grow into a mighty, majestic arugula plant that's dripping leaves for weeks and weeks, you just take the sprout. Before it's even a plant, it's just usually a diploid or a triploid, just 2 or 4 leaves. And that's a microgreen. It's exactly, it's a little baby green. We like them because
So we used to call them sprouts.
Sprouts, right? And we still could. You can see the marketers have gotten into us, right? They're microgreens now, Terry.
Yeah.
No, we used to call them sprouts. Amen to that. We used to call them sprouts. Why do we like them? Because when a seed sprouts, it mobilizes and all of its minerals. So minerals in plants are kind of held onto. They work very hard to extract them, and then they have a lot of proteins that hold onto those minerals. When the plant sprouts, it releases those minerals, and you get a lot of concentration, a lot of nutrition. And they're also they're easy. You're having chili. You think, oh, chili. I drop a big handful of microgreens on there, and I've just totally changed the nutrient profile of that bowl of chili. I have my omelet in the morning. I drop a handful of microgreens on there. So again, these efforts are to get more fibers, because fibers are the food of the organisms in the microbiome. But the majority of organisms in the microbiome are bacteria, but everything's down there. Bacteria, parasites, you got a lot of stuff down there, mostly in your colon. But most of it is bacteria. Just as a perspective of how big this is, like science-wise, right? What's the coolest thing? Probably each of us have our DNA, right? So Joe, Terry, and I, we all only have 27,000 genes. Kind of disappointing. I joke my minivan has more parts than I do. 27,000 genes in your gut, in your colon. There are 2 million different genes within the bacteria. And so in some of those, they do things that, some we're just learning. Some are things that we can't do. They make vitamin K2. They make even a little bit of vitamin B12. So again, lots of activity. And the idea here is, if we want to think about an anti-inflammatory diet, you've got to include the microbiome, because the microbiome is a master dial on our immune system and our inflammation.
You're listening to Dr. Drew Ramsey. He's an integrative psychiatrist and proponent of nutritional psychiatry and mental fitness. He served as an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University in the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons for 20 years. He's founder of the Brain Food Clinic in New York City and Spruce Mental Health in Jackson, Wyoming. Dr. Ramsey's latest book is Healing the Modern Brain: 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
And remember, Terry, lentils.
That's right. If you want to be mentally fit, you've got to eat lentils.
It's time for a short break. When we come back, we'll learn about unburdening. What is it and how can you do it?
The practice of unburdening could be important in getting grounded.
We'll find out how unburdening can help people deal with past trauma.
How could you manage unburdening if you didn't have a therapist to help you?
And we'll discuss why finding purpose is important.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-cleared, drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, a sound-based alternative to steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
Have you experienced trauma in your life? For some, it can be dramatic. An accident can cause lasting damage that's emotional as well as physical. For others, trauma may be rooted in being bullied as a child. Sometimes actions by one family member may lead to estrangement from others in the family. People may have a hard time resolving this kind of distress, especially if they've suppressed it.
We're talking with Dr. Drew Ramsey, an integrative psychiatrist and proponent of nutritional psychiatry and mental fitness. He's founder of the Brain Food Clinic in New York City and Spruce Mental Health in Jackson, Wyoming. Dr. Ramsey's latest book is Healing the Modern Brain: 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
Dr. Ramsey, I would like to ask about a couple of your tenets that are a little less often talked about than nutrition and sleep and physical activity. So, can you tell us, please, what you mean by unburdening, and how do you do that?
I'm a psychiatrist, and so as you sit with people, I get to hear the things that no one else hears about. And over time, it becomes very humbling. You walk down the street and you feel a sense that each of us is carrying a story with us, and everyone, that story has some challenges and some difficulties. A lot of times we think about trauma, very big T trauma, little t trauma. Trauma is for if you've been in the war or you've been violently assaulted. But as a psychiatrist, I've sat with people who've had traumas of having a brother who's a bully, or having a teacher in 8th grade that was just really mean to you. Things that, for whatever reason, stick with people and even in their adult life kind of haunt them. And so unburdening is the process of acknowledging that and trying to understand where our past is tripping us and stymieing our efforts to be mentally healthy in our present. And we really think about that with a goal, a directedness towards the future, when our relationships mainly aren't burdened by our past in the way that, we all know they can be. If you've had a relational trauma and you're getting into a new relationship, no matter how much work you've done and understanding and journaling and all that, things still come up. I noticed that as a parent, as my kids have gone through different ages, I've gone into the schools and I've had these just really intense experiences. I have great gratitude and joy for the teachers and the school, but also sometimes, flashing back to like 2nd grade where, I had a mean teacher. And so unburdening is trying to increase our awareness about this. How do you do it, Terry? It's different for everyone. I've found a lot of relief recently in my late 40s and early 50s in journaling. I'm really writing a lot and finding it like something I crave, really for the first time in my life. When I was younger, I think a lot of people do some of this in therapy, especially if there are intense pieces to it and you have suffered significant trauma. Working with a professional around that can be very helpful. And so I share some recommendations in the book around that. I'm a big believer of us working out our trauma and working through unburdening through active efforts, hobbies, creative efforts. I really love when people work out things through art. I work with a woman who lost her husband. I wrote about her in the book. And part of her recovery was rediscovering her creativity. And she's become a just incredible photographer. And seeing that happen and seeing how that really, just very critical to her healing. Another way, the tenet before unburdening is grounding. And I think the two very much relate for me. I found a lot of solace in 2 things when it comes to trauma, both of which relate to nature. Grounding is about being out in nature and appreciating it. That can be a park in New York City. Living there for 20 years, I found a lot of solace in Riverside Park and Central Park, especially the northern part of Central Park. This urban forest is just at the very northern tip of Manhattan, Inwood Hills Park, just incredible urban forest experiences. And then the second is with pets, with animals, that there's a way that they bring out something natural in us. This very euphoric Bernedoodle puppy now. And boy, the connection that I feel to her, the way that something I feel is kind of being released as I connect with her, take care of her, try to match her level of enthusiasm for life. So those are some of my ideas on unburdening. I really try to be clear in the book. I don't want to trivialize trauma or trauma work or people who are struggling with PTSD or chronic PTSD. Those are very serious conditions. But I did also want to acknowledge that we, just like these other aspects of mental health, we don't want to think about, working on your self-awareness just when you're depressed and anxious and having mental health struggles. We want that to be part of our everyday lives. And I think with unburdening, it's, again, so many of us get pulled back into our pasts, and that's usually a signal something needs to be worked out.
Well, I really do appreciate what you've written about unburdening, and I've bored our listeners so many times about my realization that my time as a polio patient when I was almost 3 years old had just completely disappeared from my memory banks. I knew I had been in the hospital, but I had no idea that it was such a traumatic experience. And you mentioned that, sometimes we may not always be aware of our past traumas, but unburdening can make a huge difference. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how people can go about unburdening if they don't have a therapist such as yourself to listen to their story.
Well, first realize that only a few people can handle this stuff. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but a lot of folks are very dismissive. When they hear something like this, their first instinct is they want to fix you or make you feel better or make the pain go away. That's not the people you want to explore this kind of stuff with. I think that for people who don't have a therapist, there are a lot of people in the trauma world right now. And I think being mindful and selective, and I'm even going to say protective. I'm very, very selective and cautious about who I tell the kind of deeper parts of my story to, because it's a very vulnerable spot to let people know those things. If you don't have a therapist, and you're hearing this is really resonating with you, maybe, it's time to think about one. So some people perhaps need to think about therapy. Some people I see explore this through intensives. I went to a healthcare burnout intensive that was a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. It was 4 very intense days, but it was very helpful to be with people who had a similar type of trauma around being a caregiver. So finding groups that will help you explore this. I love all the resources online. If you've been a victim of assault, if you've been a victim of identity theft, if you had an inappropriate caregiver, babysitter, teacher, there are communities and groups that have ideas, phrases, workshops, support groups, everything from free to again, like paid retreats. And I think getting a little familiar and exploring those for some people, very helpful because it gives it a space, especially when you go away. It gives it a place kind of outside of your everyday life. What I have a little ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in my practice in my clinic here in Jackson. And one of the very hard things about that work is that people can come in for a journey in the morning, and then you're back in your life. And no matter how much we kind of ask and patients kind of, create a little space to process, it's very hard to bring up, especially complex traumas, talk about it, and then, pop back into being a parent or pop back into your job. It's almost impossible. So, I think this long soundbite is around really being clear with yourself that it's important, that it's a part of who you are, that talking about it changes how it sits with you. You can't change what happened. You can change how it sits with you, how you respond to it, how it influences your current interpersonal dynamics. That's the way you can be liberated, or as I say here, the way that you can transcend it is by not having it impinge your current functioning. A lot of people have relational trauma, right, around like trust and love. And if you work that out, it means there is another set of levels to your relationship and your intimacy, because you have a new ability to trust and to love that you didn't before you had worked out some of those things.
There is one other tenet, at least one, that I would like to have you address, Dr. Ramsey, and that's another thing we don't usually talk about here on the People's Pharmacy, and I don't often see in books about psychological well-being, and that is purpose. What does that mean, and how does a person find their purpose?
Well, everybody listening right now, there's something for you. There's a reason you're here, whether that's strikes you in spiritual terms or it strikes you in work and productivity terms. But there's certain things in your life that really give you a deep sense of gratification. And it doesn't have to be one thing. I find that a lot of times when people think about purpose or influencers encourage us to live a life with purpose, they're very misinformed and misdirected. A lot of people like to opine, but those of us who are kind of in clinical practice, you see that passions aren't a great indicator of where someone should invest time. What's a much better indicator is where people have a sense of fulfillment, of happiness, of joy, of connectedness. It's much better than passion, and so purpose is just gives us when you have a sense of purpose, or there's a moment in your life, if you're thinking about it, maybe it was just you were helping somebody with some deadlines, or you woke up and you're helping a friend move. There's a directedness. That's a morning that you wake up and you're ready to go, as opposed to a morning where you wake up and you're kind of wondering about your place in the world and maybe dreading this or that. So I find purpose to be something that is an ongoing meditation for each and every one of us. It can shift and change. It does over the course of your life. It would be foolish and I would say not a complete notion to think, well, my purpose is to be a doctor. I'm a doctor. My purpose is to heal people. I find incredible gratification and joy in that. That's certainly part of my purpose. But as I've sat with this, where I really light up or have probably the most fun is, and it's a big part of my job as a therapist, is when there's creative process going on, when I'm collaborating with someone or a group of individuals and we're being creative together and we're forming something, usually something that is going to be helpful in the world. Boy, that I feel purpose like nothing else. I feel that with the books. I feel that somehow I don't know how I've had 5 books about mental health come out, to be quite honest with you. I wouldn't, especially going back in my past, think that that was maybe some of my strongest suits. And so, but being able to promote this ongoing conversation about mental health, being able to speak in a hopeful, true, evidence-based, clinically informed tone about the fact that we really can take care of our mental health and overcome really whatever mental health challenges we have. I've seen that happen over and over again. So purpose is really, especially as I turned 50, really meaningful to me in terms of a tenet. And it's the reason it's the last tenet, because, if you're not sleeping, you're irritable the next day. Your brain is filled with all kinds of crap that it didn't secrete overnight, because that's really what sleep is a waste removal cycle. If you haven't moved your body in a long time or grounded yourself in nature, I don't think you have a good sense of your purpose. I don't think you've settled down and sat with yourself and really taken inventory, because there's some basic cylinders of your mental health that aren't firing right. And so purpose in some ways to me is the carrot of the book. It's really asking you to engage in what a good psychotherapy leads someone to, which is a sense of fulfillment, a sense of completion, a sense of a cohesive identity, and a feeling of purpose in their lives, of working towards something and for something, being in service of something. That's incredibly powerful for our mental health. I go over the data about all of these in the book. When you look at the statistics of how having a sense of purpose influences your inflammatory system. People with a sense of purpose get depressed less. People with a sense of purpose live longer, healthier lives. So, there's so much time and energy being spent right now everybody wants to live longer, have a longer health span, longer. It's like, oh my gosh, could we please focus on the quality of your day today and stop spending all of this time and energy and money on thinking that maybe you could live to 90 instead of 85? Maybe, but I know you have today. And I know today there are things you can do that are more informed around your sense of purpose, wherever you are, whenever this is hitting you. It's been the most fulfilling part of my career as a psychiatrist, working with young people, old people, every age, is when you see people tap into that sense of purpose. It's the most powerful medicine there is.
Dr. Ramsey, you talk about purpose, and I really relate to that idea. I think it's absolutely critical, and I'm grateful that you included it in your tenets for good health and brain health in particular. But I wonder about retirement. And the reason I ask that is because there are a lot of people who have long, successful, productive careers, including physicians, including psychotherapists, including machinists, including basket makers. And then one day they decide, oh, okay, it's time to retire. And now all of a sudden, their purpose, or what they thought was their purpose, of getting up every day to go see patients, is no longer there. So what's your message for people who are either contemplating retirement or have already retired to maintain their purpose if it's no longer their work?
If you think that your purpose is just your work, there's incredible opportunity for you in this idea. And I think this happens a lot. It's one of the most enjoyable clinical scenarios I'm often in with somebody who's had a career, often a distinguished career, and is stepping away, is stepping down, is retiring, and what next? And so I think there's a mix of structure, of having a schedule, especially if you've been very busy, and kind of what I call titrating down. But also there's that encouragement, if you're 75 and the only thing that lights you up and gives you a good feeling is work, it's not the time to retire yet. That's actually a kind of dangerous situation in my mind. Look at the statistics of who dies by suicide in America, and 80% of those deaths are white men over the age of 60. And part of this shift in identity for men in particular of I'm productive and I have purpose because I have a job, I have a title, I have benefits, and I'm providing for my family. Again, those are great things to do. I'm engaged in all of those, and they're great challenges. But purpose, why are you here? Why you're here? I listened to a fisherman the other day, really one of these guys who just gets out, and the knowledge base, the kind of experience he has when he's way out in the wilderness in the river. It was incredible. I don't know where that leads, because so often with our purpose and idea, it's like it has to lead for something, do something, give something. And I think when we're living a life with purpose, we need to remember that oftentimes all that is it's inspiring. And so I have another patient right now. He's somewhere off the coast of the eastern seaboard. And he's a great sailor, and his retirement has been learning to handle this boat by himself. And it's just been incredible to see the intensity, the amount of knowledge. I had a FaceTime session with the other day, and he was in the engine room. And I'd heard all about these engines, so it was great to be down there with him. It's one of the great things about modern mental health. But living a life with purpose and transitioning into retirement, people have a much different set of opportunities and challenges. My encouragement is just like I encourage my patients in their 20s, don't treat this like the rest of your life. There's certain things like studying abroad that just much easier now. You can do it anytime, much easier in your 20s. Retirement, 60s, 70s, 80s. This is a time really for some people to have this next level of family creation, of being a grandparent. For a lot of people, it's around mentoring and volunteering. For a lot of people, it's much more about giving back. You have a sense of the way that the world has been kind to you. and the people and the institutions that have helped you. I'm finding that in my 50s now, looking back, thinking about, boy, when I went to Earlham College, they gave me so much financial help. When I went to Indiana University Medical School, they gave me so much financial help. When our son ended up in the NICU at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and I was a house staff there, they gave us some help. All these places helped me so much. And so I know that part of my retirement, part of my purpose, or at least I anticipate, is going to be around giving back to some of these places in a very intentional way because they've done so much for me. So I think, Joe, it's such a great question. And I find what people often do, and it's where the first tenet is self-awareness, is they worry about it. And it's kind of like mental health awareness. Like Mental Health Awareness Month is May. It's a great month. But as one of my patients very powerfully said, mental health awareness without mental health action doesn't do anything for you. And so I think, if you're worried about your retirement, that's great. Spend some time writing about it. What are some goals? What makes you excited and happy? Like when my wife and I were young, she had this red Kelty backpack, and we were in Africa for a while. I was in medical school. Indiana University has this great program in Kenya. So we were in Kenya for about 4 months. But for about a month of it, after the program, we were traveling. And so when I think about retirement, I kind of see that red backpack. And I want to get back on the trail a little bit with her. I know that'll be part of it. So, really letting yourself be rewarded, be connected, be invested and active. A big part of retirement is taking care of your health in new ways. And if you have kind of struggled to have consistency with exercise, with nutrition, 60s, 70s, or 80s are really important that you feel it like never before in your life. And I think the last part is being in a community. My wife and I very intentionally moved to Jackson. And the reason is because I see people here in their 70s, 80s. There's a 90-year-old polo player here. I mean, there are a lot of 80-year-olds on the mountain. The other day, I was mountain biking, and I got to the very, kind of end where I take a break before I turn back and go downhill. And this guy must have been in his 80s, and a couple women probably in their 70s, and they just motored right past me. Big smile and a wave, and off they went. And it's just really inspiring. And so again, being around people who are addressing that question, keeping their minds active, really, really important. Great time to think about those tenets and really put them into play.
Dr. Drew Ramsey, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Well, Joe and Terry and everyone listening, thank you all so much. It's just a treat for me to get a little session with everybody. I hope you hear my encouragement and my enthusiasm. I hope these ideas in healing the modern brain excite you and motivate you and get you building your mental fitness.
You've been listening to Dr. Drew Ramsey. He's an integrative psychiatrist and proponent of nutritional psychiatry and mental fitness. He served as an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University in the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons for 20 years. He founded the Brain Food Clinic in New York City and Spruce Mental Health in Jackson, Wyoming. Dr. Ramsey's latest book is Healing the Modern Brain, 9 Tenets to Build Mental Fitness and Revitalize Your Mind.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-cleared drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, a sound-based alternative to steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
Today's show is number 1437. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com, and that's where you can share your comments about today's interview. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning. On this week's podcast, you'll hear more about finding purpose as a step toward mental fitness. How can you maintain purpose after retirement? Many people have focused a large portion of their lives on work, and then they find themselves adrift when that's no longer anchoring their daily routine. Dr. Ramsey has valuable insights for all of us, especially as you either near retirement or have retired.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you could sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also get regular access to information about our weekly podcast. That way you know ahead of time what topics we'll be covering. Speaking of the podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd consider writing a review of the People's Pharmacy and posting it to the podcast platform you use.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thanks for listening. Please join us next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.